Okay, our last video I was comparing, the different Egyptians. My friend Radio 1 was comparing the different Egyptians, and I decided to post his video up to show you my point. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Egypt at this point is because it has to do with the foundations of the Illuminati, and we're revisiting the beginning. Okay? And we're going to go into a more complicated explanation of things at this point, as far as ancient Egypt goes. See, the Templars took the name Illuminati from the Illuminates of Ra. So for those of you who are like, what does the Illuminati have to do with Egypt? Well, the very name was taken from the Egyptians. Okay? Now, what the Illuminati did was they merged a lot of different ways of thinking together and made them one way of thinking. Okay, they took the assassins of Muslim cults, for example. They took some Christian Gnostic teachings in there. You see a lot of mind-body exercising, astral projection, things of this nature. You see a lot of different philosophies and concepts that they have adopted, but they started off with Egypt, and it's important to see that the majority, the bulk of their philosophy comes from these ancient way of thinking. Now, if you look at the orders themselves, the names reflect that. The Freemasons, the Shriners, the Order of the Golden Dawn. Then there's the temples of Isis and Osiris. Okay, that's actually the name of a secret society group. Now, the Illuminati as the Council of Five, and then of the Council of Five, they're each responsible for 5 people. That is one way it has been described. So when you talk about religion and a lot of these things, and how secret societies guided religions, and how the Christians, again, they used to use the fish, and one Christian would draw one side of the fish and the other one would draw the other, and that's how they knew there was a Christian. So secret societies kind of guided these religions. And when you look at the major ones, like the Templars and the Illuminati, which scholars do not talk about, they love to talk about the Templars, but they never want to go into the details of the Templar philosophy, because it still exists today amongst the secret society lodges. See, the temples of the ancient Egyptians were actually called the House of God, Haut Neter. Now this is ironic, or is it? It's actually, more proof than irony that churches and synagogues and the old Jewish temples were modeled after Egyptian and African temples. And their ideas come from these Africans, and they are more pursuing one school of African thought than being European thought. So the Haut Neter is the house of the god, okay, and also the priestess of the old kingdom were allowed to hold office, and you see only in the new kingdom only male priests can hold the office of the priests. But in both kingdoms, the women can't hold the office of a male deity. So in the sun temples, you wouldn't likely see a sun priestess. And of course, these temples had a lot of money and livestock and servants and priests that worked there within the temple that were their whole lives were dedicated to that. And a lot of these people who trace their bloodline back there, they consider that their families had held this in such high esteem. So it's not only their religion, it is their history. But so what has happened is, the whites within these secret societies have, when you have the decline of the new kingdom, ironically there's 12 dynasties in the new kingdom, like 12 disciples. The new kingdom went from 1570 BC to 1070 BC, I believe, and the old kingdom was from 2650 BC to 2134 BC. So when you had the decline of the old kingdom in 1070 BC, you see this is when a lot of the European ideas come into play, because the southern Egypt where most of the blacks are at this point, they start losing power, and they start losing a hold of the things. So the last pharaoh was Ramses the 11th, I believe, and he grew so weak that the high priest of Amun at Thebes ends up taking power. Now this is where you get the sun god ended up being power. It plays out in religion, it plays out in the history of Egypt as well, and it plays out in the heavens, where the sun each day comes into power. And we sleep during night, so the sun has more involvement in our lives than the moon does, because we sleep at night. Okay, now you might say, where did I get all this information from, these ideas? We get these ideas from the papyri that tells us the story, tells us hymns and things like of this nature, and scrolls. We get the information from on the Egyptian walls themselves. This is where the Egyptologists get the information from. And as Africans like me, we have the one extra thing that they don't have, is the African oral tradition, which is a huge key thing. So, you know, now also look at, you talk about Jesus' hair was being wool-like and his skin was like bronze, on and on, right? This is also talked about the gods. You know, the skin of the gods was considered, their skin was considered to be pure gold, and the divine images were made with precious metals. And you see this in the Bible. It talks about how the New Jerusalem and so, you know, in the New Kingdom, you have the public chapel, the chapel of the hearing ear. You start seeing that the Egypt itself was going toward what we consider Christianity today. Egypt itself was transforming toward this Western way of thinking, this Western Christianity. Western Christianity with Eastern influences. And it all is derived from African, Nubian, and black African way of thinking, black Egyptian way of thinking. Now, the Egyptians over time, of course, they are mixed with a lot of different races as the other races come in. So over time, you start seeing them look more and more European. And as they start looking more and more European, it's no coincidence that the story starts changing and the images start changing to those of European images. You see, the hair of the gods were likened to things that are called or lapis and lazuli. You know, semi-precious stones and things like that. And you see the same kind of symbolism, the same things being used in the Bible. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to get into in this video. Was that the other video is pretty much, that's the link to the Illuminati, the link to the Egyptians, and why I'm going to be focusing on Egypt a lot more. So, also a lot of good books to read, a lot of sources. You know, I continue to give my sources. Some sources. Let me check my notes for my sources real quick. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Complete Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt by Richard Wilkinson. Gods and Myths of Ancient Egypt by Robert Armour. A-R-M-O-U-R. Gods of the Egyptians and the Studies of Egypt Mythology by Budge E.A. Wallace. So these are few of the sources I use when I'm looking for European Egyptologist sources, and I'm comparing them to African oral traditions and African sources, and, you know, white people who aren't Egyptologist sources.